Devonshire Devil. The winter of 1855 was harsh in the British Isles. The inhabitants were suffering from the cold, and many were beginning to grumble against God, thinking he had turned his back on them. Trees and gardens were cracking because of the severe frosts, and predators were attacking people in the forests. This mysterious and eerie story began on February 8, 1885, in the south of England, in Devonshire, on the coast of Lyme Bay. On a sunny, frosty morning, people in Exmouth, at the mouth of the Exe River, which flows into the Lyme, saw strange footprints that stood out clearly in the freshly fallen snow. The footprints looked like the prints of small hooves. The townsfolk became alarmed and panicked, as some thought the Lord had truly abandoned them, and that the devil himself had come to visit. When the confusion had abated, the more sedate and prudent citizens began to examine the mysterious footprints. The general opinion was that no animal known in these parts could have made them, though in principle, the footprints were somewhat similar to those of a donkey. Each of them was 10 centimeters long and 7 wide, and the distance between two neighboring footprints was 20 centimeters. But the most amazing thing was that the footprints stretched in a perfectly straight line, and therefore, they could only be made by a creature that moved on 2 legs. There was yet another peculiarity that could not be explained. Though the snow that had fallen the night before was soft and fluffy, each hoofprint was covered by an ice crust, which made the footprints so distinct. These prints could only have appeared if the hooves, or whatever had left these prints, had been in the snow for a very short time, and were hot at the same time. When people decided to trace the route of the walk of the 2-legged hoofed animal, they encountered another mystery. The smooth chain of footprints, not deviating a centimeter from the straight line, crossed fences, climbed roofs of houses and haystacks 3 meters high. In one case, footprints were left in a rainwater gutter suspended from the roof, and in another, on the narrow ledge of the second floor of a house. And in all these unlikely situations, the length of the step remained 20 centimeters. In this manner, the unknown creature passed through Exmouth and headed north, then turned sharply at right angles to the west, crossed the estuary of the Axe 3 kilometers wide, here again turned sharply to the south, reached the town of Teignmouth and ended up on the coast of ice-covered Lyme Bay. Here the trail broke off. But the tireless trackers found them on the opposite shore. Once on land again, the creature headed southwest, passing through a series of villages and towns, and crossing snow-covered fields and pastures, before arriving in Bicton, a part of the town of Totnes, where the tracks were already broken off completely. The total length of the route of the mysterious traveler was more than 160 kilometers. At a church, the local pastor, the Reverend J.M. Mesgrave, reassuring an agitated congregation, assured them that nothing special had happened, that the footprints were those of a kangaroo that had escaped from a menagerie. But where did the kangaroo get its hooves, and how could it manage to walk 160 kilometers in one night in freezing weather, while jumping over the fences and climbing on the roofs of houses? The Holy Father was unable to explain. Local smart guys offered other, not more convincing explanations. They said the tracks belonged to a lame hare, a toad, an otter, a huge bird that had flown in from the continent, and other. Almost 128 years have passed since this mysterious accident, but its mystery has not yet been solved, and it still attracts the attention of scientists, journalists, and just inquisitive people. Often they find new documents, written evidence of eyewitnesses, old newspaper publications, helping to get closer to solving the mystery and giving reason to offer new versions of what happened. One of the most important of these documents is fragments of the book Mysteries and Notes from Devon and Cornwall, written by Henrietta Fursdon, the daughter of a parson from the town of Dawlish, and published at the turn of the 50-60s of the 19th century. The tracks appeared at night. As my father was a pastor, other clergymen from our Anglican diocese came to see him, and they all began to speculate together about these unusual footprints that could be seen all over Dawlish. The footprints were shaped like a small hoof, and inside some of them there were what looked like claw prints. I still remember how clear those strange and ominous footprints were, how many of them there were, and the fear they instilled in my soul. I thought then that such footprints could have been left by huge wild cats, and I was very much afraid that the servants would forget to lock all the doors for the night. In the fall of 1957, Tomorrow magazine published an article by paranormal researcher Eric Dingwall entitled "The Devil Walks Again." In particular, it cited the story of 26-year-old Colin Wilson, later famous writer, how in the summer of 1950 on one of the deserted beaches of Devonshire he saw on the smooth and dense surface of the wet sand, rammed by sea waves, strange prints, like hoof prints. The prints looked perfectly fresh and very crisp, as if they had been cut with a razor or stamped with some sharpened instrument. The prints were about 180 centimeters apart, and they were much deeper than those left in the sand by Wilson's bare feet. And he weighed more than 80 kilograms. The strange footprints ran from the very edge of the water, but there were no return footprints to the water. They seemed to have appeared just a few minutes before Wilson's arrival. Had he come to the beach earlier, he might have come face to face with the Devonshire Devil himself. Wilson later joined the ranks of investigators of this mystery, and in 1988 his book The Encyclopedia of Unsolved Mysteries was published in London, where in a chapter devoted to the Devonshire Devil, the author writes, "The tracks looked as if the creature was searching for something. It wandered around the backs of houses and rooftops, and it looked as if it was completely unfamiliar with the human way of life." Wilson goes on to report something sensational. A correspondent of the Illustrated London News quotes a fragment from the notes of the famous British polar explorer James Ross, dated May 1840. When Ross's ships anchored near one of the islands of the Antarctic Kerguelen archipelago, the expedition members were surprised to see hoofprints on the snow-covered shore. The polar explorers went in the direction where the footprints led, but soon reached a snow-free stony hill where there were no more footprints. The appearance of hoofprints in these places seemed completely unexplainable, since no hoofed animals were found on these islands. Already in our time, the events described above have received an unexpected and surprising continuation. It turned out that one of the members of the Ross expedition, a certain Clark Perry, after leaving the British Navy had settled in Devonshire, in the aforementioned coastal town of Teignmouth, located 10 kilometers southwest of Exmouth. In 1980, his diary and a daguerreotype, an old photograph of Clark himself holding an incomprehensible ball-shaped object, were found among his papers. As for the diary, the regular and lengthy entries of the sailor gave the following picture of events. The object Clark is photographed with is a metal ball he brought back from Kerguelen. According to Clark, James Ross was deliberately silent about the fact that on the island, in addition to unexplained footprints in the snow, there were found 2 strange metal balls, one of them whole and the other broken into pieces. Moreover, the hoofprints started just from the shards of the broken ball, and led from it in a perfectly straight line to the rocky hill. According to Clark, the orbs they found fell from the sky, but he adds that during his stay on the island he felt the constant presence of some invisible watcher near the members of the expedition, keeping an eye on them. When the expedition ships set sail for Tasmania, the 2 mysterious orbs, whole and broken, were in Clark Perry's sailor's trunk. When the other sailors, however, learned of the souvenirs Clark was carrying from Kerguelen, a superstitious fear gripped them, and they urged Perry to throw the orbs overboard. But he would not, and his companions demanded that Clark and his balloons leave the ship as soon as they reached Hobart, Tasmania's principal city and port. This time the sailor complied with the majority, and after a while he hired himself out as a sailor on another ship of Opportunity, on which he arrived safely in England in the fall of 1842. During the whole voyage Perry never breathed a word to anyone about what was in his possessions. Clark settled in Teignmouth, found work ashore, and hid the chest of mysterious mementos in the cellar of the house, where they remained for 13 years, until February 3, 1855. That ill-fated evening Perry returned home in the company of several pals, all of whom had been heavily intoxicated. The libations continued, and, drunkenly, Clark let the drinking companions know about the balls. They wished to inspect the foreign curiosity immediately. Everyone went down to the cellar, and the sailor retrieved the orbs from the chest. The unanimous opinion was that the unharmed ball must be opened. One by one, everyone began pounding on it as hard as they could with a heavy hammer. After one of the blows, a grinding sound was heard from inside the ball, and a crack appeared on its surface. Clark sobered up instantly, escorted his pals out of the house, and went to bed. The next morning, as he was going to work, Perry saw that the crack on the surface of the balloon had grown noticeably larger, and realized that the souvenir might crack at any moment. Thereafter, contrary to his custom, for several days the sailor wrote nothing in his diary. Then, on February 7, 1855, only one phrase appeared there, that on that day Clark was to throw balls into the sea on the beach at Teignmouth, and then go to Exmouth and spend the weekend at a friend's house. This entry was the last. From relatives still living in Teignmouth, Clark was able to discover that he died on the night of February 8 to 9, 1855, in Bicton, that is, where the Devonshire Devil's 160-kilometer journey, which began on Exmouth Beach, ended. Doesn't this mean that the devil was really looking for something, as Colin Wilson claims in his book? And was he looking specifically for Clark Perry, with the intention of killing him? After all, the sailor turned out to be the only person to die in Devonshire that night. But why and how did the creature from the balloon kill the man, and what then happened to the creature itself? We can assume that the answer to the first part of the question is that the Devonshire Devil needed to get rid of an unwanted witness, who lifted the veil of mystery over an unusual object that fell into his hands. The answer to the second part contains a death certificate, which says that Clark Perry died of a ruptured heart caused by severe mental distress. We must think it was the terror that gripped Clark when an unknown visitor visited him at night. To answer the third part of the question, let us return to Colin Wilson's incident on the beach in the summer of 1950. It is possible that in both 1855 and 1950 people saw signs of the same creature, only it has grown and matured over the past 95 years. At various times the press has reported new sightings of the mysterious two-legged ungulate, on snow or sandy beaches, not just in Devonshire, and on the Kerguelen, in Scotland in the winter of 1839 to 1840, Times of March 13, 1840, in Poland in 1855, Illustrated London News of March 17, 1885, in Belgium in 1945, Doubt Magazine No. 20 of 1945, in Brazil in 1954, Bernard Heuvelmann's book In the Footsteps of Unseen Animals.